Okay, class, these are the annotations for Macbeth Act 1, Scene 1, or the skinny annotations anyway. You should be coming back to the scene and adding in your own thoughts and ideas as you begin your revision. So, as always, we start by thinking about our context, our theme, the form and structure, and the language. Okay, giving an overview. So, what context is relevant to this scene? Okay. Well, it's the first scene, and as is obvious, we immediately meet the three witches, one of the major driving forces behind the action of the whole play. Now, why are the witches relevant in terms of historical context? Well, because Shakespeare's king and patron, James I, was fascinated and horrified by witches. He wrote a book called Demonology, all about witches and the like. Okay, capital letter that should be, sorry. Similarly, witches were a huge belief and factor in the time this was written. So the witches that we might think of as kind of laughable or something we'd watch on a horror or slasher film, for the audience of Shakespeare when this was put on, would have been a hugely real factor. They were totally believed in. And people thought that they could cause chaos, murder, fly, control the weather, okay, amongst many other things, and of course worked for the devil in what was a very religious time. What themes are majorly presented here? What themes does Shakespeare immediately present to us as an audience? Well, as is always the case with the witches, the theme of appearance versus reality is a major one, and things not being what they seem, especially to different people. Okay. In terms of form and structure, there are a couple major points that we'll mention before we more closely analyse this. So we should bear in mind that this is at the beginning of the play, fairly obviously. Okay. But why is that significant? Well, because we don't actually know from this first scene much beyond a hint or our expectations of witches in terms of the historical context. So Shakespeare is actually delaying the what's called exposition. Okay? So the exposition is when in almost every novel, film, Netflix series episode, anything with a plot that you will watch, at some point, usually early on in the plot, the writer or writers have to let us know what the deal is, what the situation is, what's kind of going to cause the problem. Is it in a rom-com that, you know, the main character is just out of a relationship or looking for love? If it's in episode of Narcos or some sort of drama on Netflix, is it that there's a murderer or somebody out to kill someone and that's going to provide the tension for the episode? The writer has to let us know that. You have to let us know kind of what to expect, or we get bored quite quickly. But Shakespeare's clever because he delays the exposition just a little bit. He hints at us that the witches are going to cause chaos, but we don't know what they're going to do with Macbeth, right? So, hints at the chaos, but also this leads to intrigue and suspense. Okay? Alright. We'll come back to a couple of other form and structure points, but as an overall one, in terms of the whole play, it's quite a major one for this act and scene. Now, in terms of language, this also links quite closely to structure in terms of how the witches speak. So we'll come through this line by line and come back to how these two things are quite closely linked here. Now remember, it's very important, if you're aiming for your higher marks and to set yourself apart, that we really talk closely about form and structure, and that we link theme and context and weave it in with what we say when we analyse form, structure and language. Okay, you've got to be paying attention to this, even though the ideas are tricky. It's worth putting the time in. All right. So, let's see. First of all, thunder and lightning. So this is a stage direction, as you can see, as it's italicized writing. So thunder and lightning, technically you probably know from study earlier on in school, using the weather to set a tone and a mood is a type of technique called a pathetic fallacy. Now, that's not pathetic as in not being up to much or not being much of a strong person. It's pathetic in terms of pathos. Okay, pathos, P-A-T-H-O-S, which I'd recommend you Google if you want to have a little bit of a look at some of the kind of original Greek and Latin terminology where some of this comes from. It's interesting to know. Okay. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? So the implication of meet again, right, is that we're only coming in right at the end of their meeting, aren't we? We're coming in when their actual discussion is done. So the audience is only aware that they've plotted something. Okay, probably not good. All right. You've got another link to the pathetic fallacy. They're mentioning it again explicitly. Thunder, lightning, or in rain. And yes, that is also a triple. Okay. And you can zoom in on the keywords here and talk about connotations or embed them throughout your writing. The second which, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. Okay. Now, besides hurly-burly being a fun word to say, all right, I would say the line I would choose to look more closely at here would be this: when the battle's lost and won. And why is that? Well, because immediately this seemingly simple line is actually setting up a major theme, and quite a complicated one at that, for the play. Okay, so again, the theme we're talking about is about appearance versus reality, and how things aren't always what they seem in different situations, or to different people, or indeed even what is real. Okay, so think about what's actually contained within this quote. Okay, you've got the internal tension and contrast between these two ideas. Contrast and internal tension of meaning. Okay. So the significance of a battle, and bear with me for stating the obvious, is that somebody loses and somebody wins. In a fight, somebody wins, somebody loses, right? But in this contextual situation of royalty and politics, the implications of losing and winning can be very different. So think about it, right? We've got Duncan, the king, and just immediately we've got Macbeth and Banquo, right? So let's just consider this sort of triangle. Now, supposedly, all three of these kind of win. Macbeth and Banquo